Welcome on to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition it's Spider-Man and X-Men Arcade's Revenge, brought to us by LJN. While released also on Sega Genesis, Nintendo Game Boy, and Sega Game Gear, Spider-Man X-Men Arcade's Revenge is notorious for its difficulty and overall poor controls that ends up hindering what could have been an amazing game. So here we go with Spider-Man X-Men Arcade's Revenge for the Super Nintendo. Spider-Man X-Men Arcade's Revenge is a single-player only game, where you control either Spider-Man or one of the X-Men in each of the game's levels. You can't choose which of the characters you use in different levels, but you do get to pick which order you complete most of the game's stages. After hitting start at the title screen, you'll then go to a brief story before taking control of Spider-Man in the game's first level. Spider-Man is of course one of my absolute favorite superheroes, and getting the chance to play as him in any video game was something I was always willing to do back in the good old days. However, this version of Spider-Man, while none of them are particularly amazing, pun intended, but this version just controls extremely awkwardly. You can thankfully web-sling your way from platform to platform. You can climb on walls and climb down them and use them to propel yourself over different obstacles and enemies. The biggest problem though is you jump and attach yourself to walls automatically. Sometimes you'll attach to walls when you don't want to, or end up clinging at times that aren't going to be optimal for you to do so. The first stage is a scavenger hunt trying to find all of these various bombs. What's weird is each bomb is only activated after finding the previous bomb. You'll have to use your Spidey sense, which will go off and point you in the direction of the next bomb that you have to find. But it will only go off when you're in a general vicinity of the bomb, so sometimes you may have to do a little bit of searching in order to find where the bomb is located, but you have to collect them all in a certain order. The order remains the same every time you play, so you can get a gist of where exactly you're going to need to be traveling. Thankfully, there's not a random pattern each and every time. But use this level to your advantage to get used to Spider-Man's overall control, as we're going to be putting it to the test pretty early on overall in the game. I also recommend immediately after doing this stage go right into the Spider-Man other levels, because you'll already be familiar with Spider-Man's basic control scheme. Each of the mutants as well as Spider-Man control pretty differently from one another, or present different various problems for you to deal with as far as the game's controls are concerned, so it's best to kind of do them all together with one another so that you have the most chance to learn what you need to do. Thankfully, most of the enemies throughout this level really aren't going to give you too much trouble, and they're a good preview of what's to come as far as most of the stuff you'll be dealing with, especially the very annoying robots that move up and down walls firing lasers at you at a consistent rate. The worst thing to do in the game in total when it comes to enemies though is running directly into them. If you're gonna get hit by a blast or projectile from an enemy. Don't walk directly into them, as it will do a lot more damage. After the opening scene, you'll get another cinematic with arcade, and then you'll jump into the level selection screen. You're then given the option to pick any of the characters to play as. Each one is in different levels, and you have to complete 2 stages as every one of the characters before moving on to the game's ending. I'm going to immediately jump into Spider-Man's first stage here, and you'll immediately notice that things are pretty chaotic and a lot different than that first stage. There's a lot more enemies to contend with. There are things that you can and cannot grasp when you're trying to do your wall climbing, and hopefully you've practiced a little bit with the swinging so you can have a general understanding of what you're going to need to do. The path that I take may not be the quickest or maybe the most effective, but it's the path that I take in order to get through this level with as little of a headache as I can. The level, though, is extremely difficult. Absolutely extremely difficult to get through. In fact, all of this game is very hard to beat. After making it over here and climbing down this wall, I'm going to wait for this robot to build itself up. That way, I can drop down a little bit past it and have kind of a jump on it to fire at it and then move across the ground here a little bit, taking out another enemy as I go. These laser guys are so annoying. If you can kind of jump and speed your way past them, make sure you do so. But even then, there's another one waiting for you just above. Be sure to take out this robot, though, so you can grab the extra amount of health waiting for you. The game, thankfully, does give you a good amount of health. The thing is, though, you can lose health very easily. Like I mentioned earlier, running into an enemy will drain a lot of health, and certain enemy projectiles definitely do more damage than others. One of the cool aspects is you can actually swing and use the web sling while attached to walls. Now here we run into the Shocker, but with a careful amount of swinging, I can actually make it right past him and actually don't even have to fight him. I can just swing on over past him, go over to this platform series, and continue on the stage without even having to do battle with him. Honestly, a lot easier than actually spending the time to fight him. Now here we're going to do a nice little time swing, and we can actually skip some platforming and portions of the stage. Mostly only during Spider-Man's levels can you really do these kind of shortcuts because of his web sling ability, but you can get past the game a little bit easier. You might as well use that to your advantage. Now here what we're going to do is time it correctly with a nice jump, hitting the laser at the right point, and we can actually spring our way up here, skipping another one of the encounters with Shocker. Now, just a little bit past this is actually the boss for the stage, and Astura, the giant red demon, will appear, and we'll have to battle him. This is a little tricky. It's the first real challenge that we've had as far as the enemy combat goes. Once again, you want to get hit by projectiles and not by him himself, as it will do a little bit more damage. Jumping from platform to platform, trying to get a decent amount of distance and mash the heck out of the attack buttons when you have the option to do so in order to fire enough web at him in order to defeat him and move on to the next level. Once you complete a stage, you can choose to move on and change which of the characters you're playing as and go to a different level. But just for this run through, I'm going to play each of the levels back to back. So now we're going to move over to Spider-Man Stage 2. Once again, using some of the hits from the enemies in order to advance our way a little bit through the stage, just making things a bit easier and shorter for us overall. This level, as you can easily see, has a wind gimmick to it. The wind will blow either going straight down with the rain or go left and right, and of course push and pull us in that direction, depending upon where it's going. The hardest thing, honestly, about this level, though, is that pulling and pushing from the wind, because you can easily fall down to a pit and end up losing a life that way. One of the biggest issues with the game is if you do end up losing a life at any point, you have to restart that particular stage from the very beginning. And that includes even with boss encounters. A lot of levels have a boss at the end of them that you'll have to battle, and even if you make it all the way to boss, you'll have to restart the stage from that very beginning. So it's a really hard game in order to kind of master. The controls themselves are finicky enough, with the difficulty just adding on to that. Over here, I have to wait a few minutes before I can actually make this attempt with this swing in order to get here with the wind itself. Able to grab an extra life located on the lower platforms, and then climb my way up the metal gurney. Right here, I'm going to take out the floating robot, then swing my way over and jump up to this wall. There's some more health over in the left side here, so I have pretty much full health going into the boss encounter at the end here. Now, for this boss, you're actually fighting two Spider-Man villains. You're actually fighting both Rhino and Carnage. Now for this fight, our main focus at first is going to be taking out Carnage. To do so, instead of just directly attacking him, what we're doing is the swing, as this will be able to actually hit him and keep us away at a good distance to be able to keep doing damage to him and keep him moving around. The more he moves around, the less likely he is to stand still and fire the projectiles at us and run into us. If you're doing your swing with Spider-Man, you won't be able to be hurt by the enemies, and it won't take long to actually knock out Carnage this way. It does a lot of damage. Now when it comes to just Rhino, once you've you've taken out Carnage, you're going to repeat the same strategy. Rhino's not going to come up at you and try to attack you. He just runs back and forth. So once you've made it to this part of the battle, yeah, it's a little bit tricky to kind of get the swinging down and what you need to do in order to actually damage Rhino, but you will be safe from damage when it comes to actually fighting him. Once he's taken care of, though, this is the last level we're going to be playing as Spider-Man for quite a while. In fact, the only other levels that you're Spider-Man are a brief little segment right before the final boss, and then actually the final boss itself. After completing the Spider-Man stages, we're now having the 4 X-Men characters that we have to take control of and complete their levels. Just like with Spider-Man, they each have 2 stages for you to complete, and once we defeat 2 of the levels, we'll move on to the next X-Men. Starting off, we'll be using, of course, one of the cooler, most badass characters in X-Men history, Wolverine, one of the most popular of all time. Now, thankfully, in this game, you can actually use your claws as Wolverine and not have to worry about damaging yourself like you did back on the NES version of Wolverine. The problem is, the gameplay isn't really all that much better, and he has one of the goofiest levels for you to travel through. It's a toy-filled world with toy soldiers and mafia guys inside of jack-in-the-boxes, clowns with guns, and other types of clowns. You'll have scary clown faces in the background, toy planes overhead dropping bombs. One of the cool things in the game, and one of your few advantages, is when you do damage to an enemy, especially up close combat when you're punching them with Wolverine mostly, because all the other characters you're going to be using have projectile weaponries. But with Wolverine, he can only, of course, punch and use the claws, but one thing that's cool is when you hit them, they blink for a few seconds. When they're blinking with that invincibility for a second, where you're not able to actually hit them again, you actually can walk through them, and use this to your advantage to be able to walk through enemies or be able to multiple attack an enemy while standing still. Even if they're walking in you or walking through you, you can deliver nicely timed hits in order to defeat them without having to worry about getting hit and taking damage yourself. There's a lot of hazards during the level, but for the most part, this is a pretty straightforward stage. Take your time as much as you can. Don't bum rush it like I've been doing for a large portion of the level as I'm making my way through. It worked for a while, but unfortunately there's not as much health during the stage, so I have to slow down here and take my time delivering attacks and strategic attacks to deliver damage to enemies, and then make sure they're at the right spot so that I won't end up getting hit by them, and I can hit them a few more times in order to defeat them. The jack-in-the-box enemies are pretty easy to deal with, as when they pop out, you'll have a good amount of time before they even do anything to deliver a couple of hits in order to sneak your way past. Thankfully, there's also a nice little buffer right before them where you can kind of run into their box or stand in front of their box and then do some nicely timed jumps. Now, for the boss here. The boss fight is, yes, against Apocalypse, one of the deadliest of all the X-Men villains, and he looks pretty ridiculous in this. Maybe not quite as ridiculous as the recent X-Men film, but still pretty ridiculous. Either way, we're going to be using that whole invulnerability and invincibility that we've been using throughout the level of helping us get through enemies by doing short little jumps through Apocalypse and hitting him as we jump. This way we can do damage to him without him actually being able to run into us and do damage to us. Of course, I recommend having more health than I have going into the fight, but this is a nice little way. With just some nice timing, you can easily get your way through the fight. Now for Wolverine level 2, this is kind of a weird chase level. You're being chased by a rampaging Juggernaut. What you'll have to do is you can attack him to slow him down a little bit, but what you need to do is keep attacking him throughout the level, as well as you can drop heavy objects like anvils on top of his head, just like a classic cartoon. That creepy clown always in the background staring at me, though, is extremely scary, and honestly will probably haunt my dreams forever. The problem with this level is if Juggernaut runs into you, you die instantly, so you'll have to always stay ahead of him. There's some pits for you to accidentally fall down into, and you don't have forever to do enough damage to Juggernaut to beat him, so you have to keep on moving, keep on dropping the weights and heavy objects on him, while also being able to stay far enough ahead of him. This is one of those levels that took me a lot of practice as a kid in order for me to finally be able to make my way through it. There's some nice little areas where there's not anything heavy above you, so you know that you can kind of like run ahead a little bit. You'll also have to break open the walls on a consistent basis as well in order to continue your way through the stage. Juggernaut's not stopped really by anything. He charges through platforms and other things in his path, and will jump over all the gaps except for at the very end of the stage, but if you haven't done enough damage to him by that point in the level, you'll end up either running into him and dying or falling into the giant abyss at the end of the stage as well. It's a pretty tricky level. There's no health gauge to kind of help you out, which would be so useful if you could at least know how much health that you must damage Juggernaut in order to defeat him, or just some kind of indication that you've done enough. But just keep on moving, hitting him when you can, and dropping those weights on him in order to slowly make your way through this stage. It'll definitely take a while, but finally, we make it to the end. Juggernaut ends up exploding, and we're actually near where the very end of the platforms would be. Like I said, it takes a lot of damage and hits in order to complete it. Once he's done, though, we move on to the next mutant. We're going to be taking control of Cyclops now. Now, Cyclops' levels are kind of in an underground layers kind of thing set up, where they are going through a bunch of mine carts, and there's a bunch of enslaved mutants and sentinels, Geonosians and stuff like that are here in order to battle us. The thing that's weird about the level is you can actually die landing on the train tracks. In fact, instant death is a thing that will happen on a pretty regular occurrence. You'll have to figure out where you need to go, what direction to go on the minecarts, and a lot of it will be a very slow crawl, but usually worth it just to ride the minecart if at all possible. There's a lot of areas where you won't be able to make certain platform jumps, and as long as you're in the minecart, you're usually going in the correct direction. For this case, you'll notice that I make it all the way over to the far right, and now I have to pretty much sit here and ride the minecart all the way back over to the left side. Definitely a bit of an annoyance to have to do this, but it's safer, easier than dealing with some of the other threats. After a little bit of back traveling, we do come to another minecart, have to take out some enemies in front of us, and continue along the path until eventually the minecart does reach its end. Once it does so, we can drop on down and then jump down into another minecart down below. There's going to be some spikes dropping down on your head, like we've been dealing with before. Most of the enemies, projectiles, things that they've dropped aren't going to do you as nearly much damage as running into an actual individual enemy. Be sure to be looking down at the train tracks at all time in the minecart so that you'll be able to fire at the various mines that you can accidentally run into, which will damage you quite a bit. So make sure that you're always paying attention. You see any of those flashing multicolored mines, make sure that you take them out. Just like we did on the top portion, we're going to ride this minecart all the way over to the far right side, bounce off the wall, and now travel back with the minecart all the way back over to the far left side. Just like we did before, once we reach the end, we'll be able to get out of the minecart and continue along the path. Wait for the minecart over here to actually make it to you, and then jump in it just like we have the previous ones. At this point, you've probably gotten used to Cyclops' ability of being able to blast the enemies in your path and looking and taking out the various mines that are along the train track itself. Right here, I'm going to jump out just so it's easier to take out a couple of the enemies here instead of accidentally running through them, and then jump the last couple of platforms and drop on down here. Have to let my fist do the talking when it comes to battling this guy, then wait on the edge here, not jumping on the tracks itself, and another minecart will slowly roll on in so that I can continue on this wonderful minecart journey. At the end, keep on running past, you'll see an enemy down below, know that it's safe to drop on down, and then you want to drop on down to this platform, wait a few seconds for the minecart to come there, and then jump in it. Thankfully there's that little ledge there, so it's not a completely blind fall or anything when dropping down. Just make sure that you hug the wall a bit so that you'll land safely there, and then can easily get into that minecart. Once you made it over here, time for the boss fight. Be sure to jump out of the minecart, then duck down in front of the master mold and keep firing at him until he flies up in the air. Once he is, then you can move away a little bit, face diagonally upwards so that you can point your laser beams at him and keep firing. Once he drops back down, you can get on close again and keep firing at the feet in order to keep on doing a pretty good amount of damage. Unfortunately, though, he can still hit you here, so once you get a little bit low on health, you'll have to change the strategy up a bit, keeping your distance a bit more and watching out for the projectiles. But by the time that happens, he shouldn't have too much more health left. Once that's done, jump along a couple of platforms and move on to the right side of the screen, where you can now go back to the level selection. Go right back in. Now we're going into Cyclops Part 2, which is pretty much more of the same of the style of level that we just dealt with. Unlike the previous stage, though, there is a lot more platforming for you to do, and you're not going to be getting into the mine carts like we did in order to ride around, so you'll have to do a lot more of the action on foot, jumping from the platforms and working your way slowly through the stage. Without the minecarts, though, in order to make your way through the level ends up being a bit more bland. There's a few different things to it, though, such as the giant aircraft that will sometimes fly overhead, dropping down bombs on top of you that you'll have to watch out for. But overall, the stage is relatively plain. A little bit into the ways, though, you will come to the Master Mold again. This fight works exactly the same as it did before. The thing is, though, after this fight, we still aren't at the end of the level. In fact, we actually have to battle a giant version of him before we're actually able to complete the Cyclops portion of the game. Once he's been defeated, you can continue along the stage, working your way from the platforms. There's a few kind of leaps of faith that you may have to do, which are a bit scary, but overall platforming is okay in this game. It definitely works and is one of the better functionalities as far as the overall control scheme of the game goes. Thankfully, this level is relatively short. After defeating that boss, you'll come to a part here with a whole lot of enemies, but at the end of the screen, you'll then be teleported to the boss encounter. Now here you're facing the giant version of the Master Mold, Giant Sentinel, and this is a pretty tough fight. You have to consistently hit him in the head, which can be hard to aim at with the fact of being able to actually look up with Cyclops and timing it right. There's a lot of projectiles going on. Thankfully, some of them can actually be destroyed using your punches or your lasers to help you out. Other ones you're just going to have to avoid altogether. Always be prepared to move and only take the shots when you think you're going to be safe enough in order to do damage. Every once in a while, he'll blast up into the air, go to the opposite side of the screen, and then come back. And as you continue to do damage, you'll blow off different body parts, which will help the battle get a little bit easier in some ways because there's a little bit less going on. But either way, just keep your attack focused on his head, and he will slowly blow up and explode, and you should be able to defeat the boss relatively easily. The fact that he stays still even with all the projectiles is one of the easier aspects. Unfortunately, once you get near the end of the fight and his head has been destroyed, he will fire out more missiles than even ever before, and you'll actually have to hit him in the waist area in order to do damage after you've done enough to the head. Just keep damaging him. Eventually he'll fully explode and you'll be able to move back to the level selection screen and select the next level. Now this is where the game's true, quote, fun begins, as you jump into Storm's levels. These levels are terrible, not only in design, but just the overall control scheme that you have to deal with. Instead of just fighting or flying with Storm, which would be really cool, you instead are swimming with Storm. She fires out electricity, which thankfully can damage most of the enemies around her, but you actually have to go through and destroy these various machines that will make the water level rise. You also have to manage Storm's breath gauge. If that runs out, it's a death for Storm, and just like the other levels, you'll have to start all over again from the beginning. Sometimes it's best to just kind of wait it out in order to get your breath fully back before attempting to destroy any of the machinery around you. Since it works as your health, when she gets hit, she'll lose part of that breath meter. So when you're getting damage from all the various enemies, you will lose breath instead of having a separate gauge for health and a separate gauge for the oxygen. Some of the areas are a bit tedious, and you'll have very little opportunity sometimes in order to get past things like electrical currents, and even the enemies can bombard you really quickly, like these annoying laser blasters on the walls, moving up and down really fast and consistently firing. Like I said, sometimes you may just have to wait a little bit, fully replenish all of that oxygen before attempting to move and continue on in the level. The level itself is pretty convoluted, since everything kind of looks the same and hallways can easily blend into one another. But as long as you're working your way upwards, even if you reach like the top portion where you're at the surface of the water, you'll know that you have to travel back, and maybe you missed one of the various machines at one of the various turns or hallways. With this style of level, it's best to take your time when you can do so. Because of the franticness of the whole oxygen meter, you can't always take it really slow, but don't destroy those machines until you're absolutely sure and ready in order to advance in the level, taking out whatever enemies you possibly can, and refilling that health as much as possible. There is no time limit on the stage, so as long as you're able to have some oxygen, you should be able to keep on going through. While overall this game isn't the best, and its difficulty and problems with the control scheme are some of the things that just makes it really not the funnest of comic book games, especially on the 16-bit systems, but the soundtrack from the Fallen Brothers is easily one of the reasons to even try out or check out Spider-Man X-Men Arcade's Revenge. So one of those things, even if you don't want to play the game, which I wouldn't recommend really trying it anyway, check out the soundtrack. It's definitely worth listening to. Now for the boss area here, we have to battle this machine moving up and down, and when we get low to the ground we can keep blasting it with lightning bolts, but we also have to keep an eye on our oxygen meter at all times. After taking out the other enemies in that area, we can kind of get it down to the bottom of the screen and finish it off, in which case then we can go to the exit and move on to Storm Level 2, which unfortunately is more of the same but even more difficult than the previous level. We have to still worry about all of the oxygen, destroying the machines, and there's a bunch of enemies, including some new ones, that are going to get in the way. Over here, wait for the mines to kind of rise up and take care of them. Then wait for Storm's oxygen to fully replenish before then dropping down and then destroying the machine directly below you. You'll notice that the enemies here can destroy that oxygen meter and take all of your health away very, very quickly, to the point that it's almost ridiculous how easy it is to die during the course of these stages. This is the kind of level, when I rented the game as a kid, is the reason why I was unable to beat the game on consistent weekends of renting it and trying to play through it. Since the gameplay is so slow also during the Storm stages, it ends up being pretty boring overall. Yeah, Cyclops', Wolverine's, Spider-Man's levels may not be the greatest, but at least they move a lot quicker than the very slow-paced Storm levels here. The only thing good about the level is it's relatively short compared to the first stage, but that's because of the giant boss at the end. Now, for this boss, you have a giant machine, and it'll go around in a circle lighting up. When the part of it lights up that you're near, you can attack it and then destroy it. Your goal, of course, is to destroy all the parts of the machine. What I recommend doing is not destroying the other small oxygen-like machines in the room that's going to fill the room up. Start off by destroying a few of the machine parts, then work your way down here into this lower right corner and destroy this machine, the one that's farthest away from actually being able to receive more oxygen. Then, work your way back, but do not destroy the other machine located here. Instead, try to do your best to refill some of your oxygen. It's tough, because there's just so many projectiles going on, but you can also destroy some of the machine while doing this and trying to replenish it. You won't be able to hit the very top part of the machine yet, which is the last one that we're going to work on. So this gives you a nice little gateway, because once you hit that last machine, the entire rest of the thing is going to fill up, and you have a very limited time in order to destroy the machine before you end up running out of oxygen. Once you've destroyed all of the machine, though, then destroy that last oxygen valve thing, whatever, water rising thingy. I don't know what they are. Either way, once you've destroyed all the rest, fill up your oxygen meter. There shouldn't be as many projectiles at this point. Destroy it, let the water rise a bit, and then destroy that last part of the machine. And once it's done, you destroy it all and move on to the next level of the game. Now, the last of the X-Men that we're going to get to play as is GAMBIT. Now, his stages, his first one at least, is a relatively traditional platforming stage, with one exception of being that you have to move through the stage rather quickly because there is a giant rolling ball of death coming your way. His level is filled with weird chess pieces come to life, pawns, rooks, and knights, firing at you and trying to run into you. They do it a substantial amount, just like other enemies, when they run into you, so you have to be very cautious of that. GAMBIT does not have an unlimited amount of his ability to use at his disposal like many of the other X-Men characters or Spider-Man. The good thing is, though, every time you defeat enemies for the most part, as well as spread out throughout the stage, will be power-ups to fill up your card meter. You also have an all-encompassing special attack that you can use that will cause a bunch of, like, energy blades to go around GAMBIT for a period of time, destroying anything that's in his path and making him invulnerable for a few seconds while that move is currently being done. If you run out of cards at any point, you're pretty much doomed, and you won't be able to attack anything. If you run out of that, plus your special moves, you have nothing at your disposal, and you'll have to either run through the enemies, or end up dying and restart the stage. This level, the first one, isn't nearly as bad when it comes to that stuff, but the second stage, which is another one of these scrolling style of levels, but instead of coming from left and having to run away, you'll actually be rising like an elevator. Because of that, it is a lot tougher to keep the card meter up and keep your health up. The boss for this level is a giant playing card. I don't think it's supposed to represent anybody else, I could be wrong. Start off by immediately staying underneath of it and launch a ton of cards straight at it. You'll be able to destroy quite a bit of it by just doing that. After a while it will fly away, and then it will drop some other little enemies for you to battle. Destroy them, and you'll be able to pick up some extra card power-ups. Be sure that you have plenty of card meter when you're destroying these guys. The card will end up turning red, a solid red, and you won't be able to damage it during this part, but once it turns white again, you'll be able to continue damaging it. Every time it does so, it will fire out projectiles as well as spawn more of the little pawns that will start moving towards you and trying to attack you. Just keep that card meter up and run away from a lot of the projectiles, and don't let enemies run into you. And it'll take a little bit because he has a lot of health, but overall a relatively easy boss fight, at least as far as this game is concerned. Gambit level number 2 is one of the banes of my existence as far as this game is concerned, and besides the storm levels, the hardest level in the game, at least in my opinion. You're rising up on a gurney or elevator-like platform, and at any point, if the ceiling or other blocks get in your way, you can end up getting crushed and instantly die. This is one of those levels, just like the rest, where if you end up dying, you have to restart it. So you can get far into the level and get crushed, instantly dying, and have to restart the entire stage. The level also features a ton of dead ends that will easily stop your path and cause you to end up losing a life. Some of these paths do contain some valuable, useful items like extra health or more ability for your card power-up, but at the same time, there's no sense in going after them because if you die, you're restarting the whole level anyway from the beginning. This level also features a boss that will take quite a lot of health, so you want to try to keep your card meter relatively high up, especially once you get to the end of the level. The boss takes lots of hits, and if you run out of cards during the boss fight, you're just going to have to die and start the level all over again from the beginning. Make sure, of course, if you didn't already know, to choose the left side, not the right. It teases you on that right side, putting health power-ups and full card meter gauges on that right side, just to trick you and being like, oh, that was a cool path. Oh, wait, now I'm dead and the whole thing was useless anyway. The left path, though, once you get a little bit higher up, there's going to be the knights and the pawns trying to drop on top of you. The farther the maze goes, I'm going to drop over to the left and pick up the items here and continue along this left side. Make sure that you do destroy the platforms above you so you don't end up getting your head squashed. Continue along the left side, destroying a lot of blocks. There is a card replenishment on this side so you can refill that meter along the way, but you have to fire quite a bit of cards while on this side. Once you've made it up to this part with all the diamonds and stars, you can pick those up for extra score if you really want to, and then the final part of the level begins. There's a lot of different paths for you to choose in this big maze-like structure. Choose the second to the right part here so that you can go up, watching out for some pawns, and be able to take out one of the knights. Now, once you make it a little bit higher up, do not stay where you are. Instead, go right and go to these gray silver platforms. This way, you'll be safe and be able to make your way up. You can technically go the other side if you're really quick about it. You'll have a very small window to destroy the blocks that are needed in order to advance. And at the same time, you'll end up using quite a bit of your card meter, at which point you may not have enough to defeat the Black Queen at the end of the level. The boss for this stage is, well, a giant version of the Black Queen. I'm kind of confused. In fact, it could even be the Dark Queen from Battletoads with the way that the character's set up. You have to destroy both the left and right arm of this giant robotic Black Queen. It's firing lasers, and she, from her head, fires fireballs. Move back and forth, watching out for the laser and the fireballs. If the laser hits you, move quickly out of it, because it does last a while and will drain your health very quickly if you let the laser fully do damage to you. Waste all of your card meter before picking up one of the 2 replenishments that are located in the boss battle. Once you destroy both arms, there's no lasers, but you do have to watch out for the fireballs, which will do a hefty amount of damage. Keep firing up the cards straight up, though, at the giant robotic Black Queen until she's defeated. And now we move on to the last part of the game. Now, you have to do basically 5 little mini levels, playing as each of the characters we have to play as throughout the course of the game. But your goal in these levels are just to get to the end, and then each of the characters, except for Spider-Man, will end up getting captured, leading into the final boss encounter against Arcade himself. Thankfully, these levels are relatively short, but you still have to be cautious during them. They do have a set order. You don't get to select which one that you would like to do first, so we start off with Cyclops. Each of these levels are kind of mini versions of the levels they dealt with before, at least as far as the enemy typing goes within the course of these levels. The only level that's significantly different from its predecessor is the Storm stages. Thankfully, you don't have to swim. In fact, you get to actually platform with Storm, and she has the highest jumping ability of all the characters, but she doesn't flat out actually have the flight ability like Storm technically should have. Part 2 here, we're going as Wolverine, fighting the same clowns and toy soldiers that we had to battle before. Make sure that you get the claws out because they will do more damage to the various enemies, and you can use that invulnerability to help you out by hitting an enemy, letting it run back and forth even through your body, and it won't be able to do too much damage. While these areas are relatively short, you do have to still be a bit cautious when making your way through because you could still of course end up dying just because of the sheer amount of damage caused by running into various enemies. Third up for these mini stages is Gambit. Once again, we have to watch out for his card meter as we're making our way through. There is some big jumps during this part with Gambit in particular. He honestly probably has the hardest of these areas just because of the length of some of the jumps. It can be actually pretty easy to drop down. In fact, when you get hit by projectiles, you usually freeze in mid-air and can accidentally fall straight down into an open pit. If you're not careful, like I wasn't being very careful here, you can lose health really fast. So you can see I'm already really low health, and honestly, I've only been hit by a handful of enemies. But thankfully, I'm at the end, and now we move on to the fourth of these little mini levels, getting to now play as Storm. Storm has a lightning ability similar to Cyclops, and she also has a bomb ability, basically a giant whirlwind or hurricane that she can summon, which works kind of like Gambit's ability, which will hit all the enemies around her. She can still take a lot of damage, but her projectiles end up not doing much damage to her when you get hit by these guys. So just take your time, blast them, enjoy the little bit of extra jumping ability you get with Storm. In fact, if you could actually play a Storm like this throughout her levels, it would have been a much more enjoyable set of stages. Fifth, and finally, you get to play as Spider-Man once again. It seems like forever since the last time we actually controlled the web slinger, and here you're actually working your way down from the top portion of the stage down to the very bottom, watching out for the enemies, and having to fight the same ones we had to fight during the course of this level, though there is a lot of little health pickups throughout the course of this area, so you don't have to be as cautious, but you can get bounced around really easily. These laser guys and just the fire from the general enemies is so annoying, and you're easily bounced around, which actually helped us during Spider-Man's levels, allowing us to bypass certain platforming areas, but for the most part they just end up being annoying during the course of this particular level. Just like the other ones, it's not really that long of a stage. Drop down at the very end, and now it's time to actually battle Arcade, the final boss of the game. He has multiple different forms, starting off with a giant machine. Stay on the left or right side. Thankfully, the X-Men will actually break out of their holds and help you a little bit during the course of this. Watch out for the giant missiles that he spews out. He fires 2 at a time, but you should have enough distance to be able to get away from them. He'll move faster as the battle goes on, but overall not too tough of a fight. His second form is a more bouncy, springy version of himself, firing out even more projectiles than before, but still relatively easy to dodge. In fact, he's much slower in this form. Once that's done, he'll go to a much quicker form of himself on the very bottom, firing even more projectiles and moving a bit faster. Ducking down on the edge of the platform here on the far left side will allow you to easily hit him. The final form, the most annoying, has him spawning multiple clones of himself. In fact, there's 8 of them that you're going to have to destroy. You have to do so quickly because they can damage you really fast. That annoying knockback and bouncing all around is extremely a pain in the butt to deal with, but once they're all done, you'll see some explosions and get to sit back and enjoy the ending to Spider-Man X-Men Arcade's Revenge. So there you have it. That's the actual ending after you get to see the ending cutscene, which is mediocre at best. I mean, it's better than just seeing a, hey, congratulations and good job beating the game. But it's still really nothing all that spectacular for a game that took me a very long time in order to get good enough at it. After a while of looking at this, it will go to the high score screen. You'll be able to input your initials if you earned a high score, and then it'll go back to the main title screen where you'll be able to enjoy this wonderful, beautiful experience all over again if you actually wanted to do that. In the end, Spider-Man and X-Men Arcade's Revenge is a very tough game. I still have a lot of nostalgia for it because I played it a lot and rented it a lot from Blockbuster back in the day, but it's still not a very good game. Best part about it, easily the soundtrack. And I much even rather play some of the Sega Genesis Spider-Man games or Maximum Carnage as a Spider-Man fan. Honestly, not that great of an experience. But with that, guys, that's going to wrap up this edition of Play It Through. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, consider giving a thumbs up or commenting down below. If you enjoyed this and want to see some more content, check out the countdown I did for the worst NES sequels. Or if you want to see some more Spider-Man action, check out the Spider-Man vs. Kingpin for Sega CD I did a while back. Some really awful cutscenes in that one. I also need to thank all the members of my Patreon. You guys are keeping this channel alive with your monthly pledges. You can help out as well by clicking the Patreon button at the bottom of the screen and see all the great incentives for helping out the channel. Thank you guys, though, so much for your continued support, and of course, I hope you enjoy.